If you've been with us on this journey into free expression, you know the sources we've examined recently can feel, well, a bit disheartening.
There's a definite pattern.
We've seen evidence that, particularly in contexts like the UK, free speech is increasingly conditional, qualified, and its enforcement, it's sort of drifted away from formal law.
Right. It's moved into this really sticky realm of culture, institutional codes, and probably most powerfully, self-censorship, just pure risk aversion.
It's that quiet erosion that's so hard to put your finger on.
Exactly. I mean, when you can't point to one specific law that took the right away, but it's more like 1,000 tiny decisions by platforms or employers or universities.
Yeah.
It just feels like this unstoppable current.
And that leads us really to the core mission of this deep dive. We have to ask the question, has this type of decline, this quiet systemic drift, has it ever been spotted and stopped?
Has the course actually been corrected before the erosion just becomes permanent? And I'm really glad you asked that, because the short answer is yes, it has. But understanding how that correction happened, well, that tells us everything we need to know about a system's actual resilience.
Okay, so it's not just about good intentions.
Not at all. It reveals that the fight isn't won by, public outcry alone. It's won by making sure the institutional system still has functional, robust brakes.
The capacity to legally challenge that overreach and to do it early.
Early and effectively. That's the key.
So we're looking for evidence of systemic resistance. Those moments, the legal system actually stepped in and said, okay, this far and no farther.
Yes. We're not looking for some grand reversal of culture. We're looking for an internal mechanism that reset the boundary lines.
And the source material is pretty clear on this.
It's adamant. Decline is so much harder to reverse once it has fully set in, so that early correction is absolutely vital.
And what makes that correction possible?
It's the clarity of the law. I mean, vague rules are a profound liability. They are basically an invitation for institutions to overcorrect, to police way beyond what the law actually intends.
I get the danger of vagueness in theory, but break that down. Why is it the ultimate enemy in practice?
Because it triggers what the sources call the unnecessary retreat. If the boundary line is blurry, you, as a citizen, you just automatically assume the safest place to speak from is nowhere near it.
So you pull back?
You pull back, you moderate your opinion, you self-censor. And it's not because a law explicitly stopped you. It's because the risk of crossing some unknown threshold is just too high.
That's the death by 1,000 cuts we were just talking about.
It is. So to prevent that, to give people confidence, the courts need bright lines. They absolutely do.
So what are those lines?
Well, when they're assessing restrictions on expression, the courts, especially within the European human rights framework, they stress 3 necessary legal principles.
Okay.
They demand precision, foreseeability, and proportionality.
Precision and foreseeability, I guess those go together. The idea that a law has to be written precisely enough that I can reasonably foresee if what I'm about to say is legal or not.
That's it, exactly. In the legal phrasing, a restriction has to be clear enough for you to regulate your conduct. So if a law on, say, hate speech is so broad it could mean anything or nothing, it fails that foreseeability test.
And proportionality. That's about weighing the state's interest against my right to speak, right?
Precisely. The state can only restrict speech if it serves a pressing social need, and that is a very high bar. You can't use a sledgehammer to crack a nut.
So if the government's response is just an overly broad or blunt restriction, the courts should strike it down.
They should, for being disproportionate to whatever harm it's trying to prevent.
What's so fascinating here is that this isn't just neat academic stuff. The courts are stressing these principles as a tool for citizen action.
Yes, it's a clear standard for the public to use when they challenge overreach. It's like the working instruction manual for the system's brakes.
And that takes us right into the history, into what a successful correction actually looks like.
Yes, and it is so often forgotten how crucial these legal battles were in securing the framework we even have today.
So let's start with the big one, the case the sources identify as maybe the most foundational, the Sunday Times v. UK from 1979.
Right, and the scene here is grim. The backdrop was the thalidomide tragedy, a catastrophic event. A morning sickness drug caused just severe birth defects in thousands of children.
And the Sunday Times was doing a big investigative series on it.
A powerful, detailed series. They were focusing on the parent company's actions, what they knew, when they knew it.
But the UK legal system stepped in to stop them from publishing.
Correct. The government got an injunction, that's prior restraint, stopping the speech before it even happens. The argument was that the reporting might prejudice ongoing legal proceedings, and the domestic courts agreed.
But the newspaper didn't stop there. They took it all the way to Strasbourg.
To the European Court of Human Rights. And the ECHR delivered just a landmark judgment. They ruled the injunction violated Article 10, the right to freedom of expression.
And their reasoning.
The court said that, look, while the government's concern about judicial impartiality was legitimate, the restriction itself was not necessary or proportionate.
So this wasn't just a win for one newspaper. This was the system setting a huge, immovable rule.
Absolutely. The rule was clear. You cannot suppress speech just because it's inconvenient or embarrassing or even potentially prejudicial unless there's a clear, necessary, and pressing social need.
That need has to be weighed against the public interest.
Heavily weighed against it, especially in a public tragedy like thalidomide.
That is the perfect definition of correction. The overreach was challenged, the ruling reset the boundary, and critically, the sources confirmed that UK courts changed their approach after that.
They did. This case became the new gold standard for prior restraint.
And the case also established a second crucial mechanism.
Yes, the recognition of the chilling effect as a real legal concept. Because one of the most powerful lines in that judgment was the court saying, and I'm quoting here, "A norm cannot be regarded as a law unless it is formulated with sufficient precision to enable the citizen to regulate his conduct."
Wait, okay, that brings us right back to vagueness. So the court isn't just saying this specific restriction was bad. They're saying if a law is too vague, it's not even a valid law for this purpose.
Exactly. They were saying that uncertainty itself is a form of censorship. The fear of crossing an ill-defined line has a deterrent effect on lawful speech. And that deterrent effect is what the UK legal system now formally recognizes as the chilling effect.
It's the legal acknowledgement that just the possibility of sanctions makes people shut up.
Mm-hmm.
This feels incredibly relevant today. I mean, the courts back then were focused on legislation, but most modern self-censorship isn't driven by fear of the police.
No.
It's driven by fear of your employer, your university, a social media platform.
That's a really profound observation. The legal concept focuses on state action, but the principle is universal. Whenever the rules on speech lack precision, the chilling effect accelerates.
It doesn't matter if the vague law is from Parliament or from a university's Community Standards Committee.
The result is the same. The individual retreats unnecessarily.
Okay, so the courts secured the line for the press, and they defined the danger of vagueness. The next question is, did they protect the ordinary citizen criticizing power? The sources point to a purely domestic case in 1993.
Derbyshire County Council v. Times newspapers. Yeah, this case closed a really dangerous, quiet loophole. A local government authority tried to sue a newspaper for libel.
If they'd won.
Oh, if they had succeeded, it would have created this devastating mechanism for powerful public bodies, councils, agencies, NHS trusts to just financially weaponize defamation law and silence critics.
It wouldn't even matter if they won the case in the end. The sheer cost of fighting it would be enough to bankrupt a critical journalist.
That was the danger. It was a tool of financial drift, letting power narrow debate without ever formally changing a law. But the House of Lords, the highest UK court at the time, slammed the door shut.
And their reasoning was explicitly about free speech.
It went straight to it. They ruled that public bodies should not be able to sue for defamation. They said allowing such a suit would have a clear, inhibiting effect on freedom of expression about public matters.
They recognize that the right to criticize government is fundamental.
And that powerful entities shouldn't be able to use the courts to silence legitimate scrutiny. So in that moment, the system corrected itself. It blocked a new avenue for censorship.
So these cases show the brakes can work, but they also, I suppose, bring us to the limits of those brakes.
Exactly. Courts are not a magic wand. We have to look at countries where international courts issued ruling after ruling, and yet the institutional decline just continued.
Which brings us to the contrast. The UK versus situations in, say, Hungary or Turkey. They're all subject to the same European Court of Human Rights.
And the ECHR has issued numerous repeated rulings, finding clear violations of free expression in both countries, especially against journalists and opposition voices.
And that oversight did achieve something.
It did achieve several important things. It documented the abuses. It gave domestic opposition leverage. It probably slowed the pace of outright repression and made it harder to normalize.
But the critical point is what it failed to achieve.
It failed to reverse the institutional decline once the domestic rot had really set in. When a domestic system decides it just no longer cares about international norms, the rulings become symbolic.
Which highlights that crucial metaphor from our sources.
That international courts are brakes, not steering wheels. They only work when the domestic legal machinery still values legitimacy and expects to follow the judgments. If that expectation goes, the rulings are just ignored.
So we pull all this together, the successes in the UK with the failures elsewhere. What are the fundamental conditions that have to exist for correction to even be possible?
Well, the analysis points to four essential elements. The first two we've basically established. First, the law must be clear. Precision, foreseeability, all of that, so citizens can speak with confidence.
And second, the courts must be independent and respected.
Yes. Their judgments have to actually reset boundaries, and the institutions they govern have to follow them. Otherwise, the rulings are worthless.
Okay, let's move to the third, which really hits our modern reality. What happens when enforcement drifts away from the formal legal system?
Right. The third essential element is that enforcement hasn't fully drifted into private hands. Just think about the main entities regulating your speech today.
Your employer's HR department, a social media platform, a university committee.
Insurers, corporate PR departments advising caution, the list goes on. The moment the power to regulate speech shifts to these private actors, the legal system breaks, loses its grip.
A court can overturn a government injunction or strike down a vague law.
Exactly. But a court really struggles to overturn a private decision made under some opaque terms of service or an employer's internal professionalism code. Legal correction gets so difficult because the decision was never a formal legal action in the first place.
The battle has moved on to non-legal terrain. That's a huge challenge for you to think about. If the threat isn't the state anymore, but the private institution you rely on for your job, how does the law even intervene?
It's very difficult. It can only intervene indirectly after the fact or through slow, cumbersome regulation. But the fourth element for me is the most profound and maybe the most fragile safeguard of all.
Which is?
That power expects to be temporary.
That sounds more philosophical than legal.
Yeah.
What does it mean for the concrete survival of free speech?
It's about the institutional calculation of risk. If the people holding power, a political party, a CEO, whoever believed they might eventually lose that power, they have a vested interest in keeping the free speech framework intact.
Because they know they might soon be the opposition.
And they will need the protection of those rights themselves. So dissent is viewed as a necessary, normal function of the system. It's an insurance policy against your own future vulnerability.
But conversely, what happens when power feels permanent? When a government or an institution believes its position is safe, perpetual, or that the opposition is an existential threat?
Then dissent stops looking like a necessary part of democracy. It starts looking like an attack that needs to be managed, suppressed, neutralized by any means necessary.
Including using all those vague internal codes we just talked about.
It becomes a risk to be managed, not a right to be protected. And when that expectation of temporary power fades, one of the deepest institutional safeguards for free speech just fades along with it.
So let's tie this all together. The big takeaway from this deep dive is that, yes, decline is interruptible, the courts prove that, but correction is infinitely easier in the early stages.
Before those corrosive habits get normalized, and before enforcement drifts entirely out of the legal domain, the courts and legal clarity are essential tools, but they rely on those deeper systemic conditions to actually work.
Independence, compliance, and crucially, the assumption that power is temporary.
Without that institutional buy-in, the most brilliant legal ruling is just ink on paper.
Which brings us to the final, provocative thought for you to carry forward. If we accept that legal institutions struggle to address censorship once it has fully drifted into private hands, the platforms, employers, universities, and we also accept that the most vital institutional guardrail is the assumption of temporary power.
Then consider this. How robust is the culture of free speech if its survival fundamentally hinges on the calculation that power expects to be temporary? What is the true state of resilience when powerful figures across the political spectrum increasingly view dissent not as a loyal opposition to engage with, but as an existential threat to be permanently neutralized? That, more than any specific law, is the critical question.